Good evening. I'm pleased to welcome each of you to this evening's event sponsored by the J. Phillips Center for Interfaith Learning, which serves both the campus here at St. John's and the College of St. Benedict. And we also have programming down in the Twin Cities on the campus of the University of St. Thomas and beyond within the communities of the Twin Cities. So and this event is co-sponsored by the departments of Peace Studies and Theology. So I'm grateful to those departments. I'm a member of one of those, and I have the pleasure of directing the J. Phillips Center. So welcome to all of you. And with you, I am delighted to be welcoming our distinguished guest speaker tonight, Rabbi Amy Eilberg. It's a real privilege for me to have the opportunity to introduce my friend and colleague, Rabbi Eilberg. Tonight's lecture has the same title as when we advertised it, from enemy to friend. But I see the subtitle has been tweaked on me. So the Jewish practice of sacred conflict engagement, which I appreciate so much. In 1985, Amy Eilberg became the first woman ordained as a rabbi in Judaism's conservative movement.
You're coming back.
Soon after that, she found her vocation in the work of healing, and it wasn't long after that that she became nationally recognized as a leader in what became referred to as the Jewish healing movement. This movement resulted in the creation of a few dozen centers of Jewish healing around the United States, including one in San Francisco, which Rabbi Eilberg co-founded and directed. And she is also founding co-director of a Center for Jewish Spiritual Direction. And she's known well and widely as a leader in that field of spiritual direction. Eventually, Rabbi Eilberg became deeply engaged in the work of peace and reconciliation, particularly in connection with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And she is now at work on a book with this title, and God only knows what the subtitle is going to be. In the Huffington Post, in a blog, in a bio about her, connected to an article that she wrote, the subtitle was "The Sacred Practice of Jewish Peacemaking," but who knows, maybe it'll be this, "The Jewish Practice of Sacred Conflict Engagement." Rabbi Eilberg is also deeply involved in the work of, in interfaith work. From 2007 to 2011, she served as a coordinator of the J. Phillips Center's Conversations Project, fostering interfaith learning and friendship among Jews, Christians, and Muslims in the Twin Cities area. Now she continues working with our center as special consultant for our interfaith conversations. And she also serves on the International Jewish Committee for Interreligious Consultations. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Amy Eilberg, who is going to speak to us about why conflict arises among individuals and groups, what contributes to the resolution of conflict, and how each of us can serve the cause of peace and peacemaking.
Thank you so very much, John, for the warm invitation and all the opportunities for wonderful work together. So apologies for the ever-changing subtitle. I am working on this book, and I don't yet have a contract with a publisher. So the way this works is once I have a publisher, he will decide what the subtitle will be. I get to change my mind every week. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what it really turns out to be tonight. So I think the place that I want to begin, yeah, if this is, Andy will do his work and make the irritating sound stop. I once, some years ago, attended a conference in Jerusalem called The Contribution of Interfaith Dialogue to the Resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict. The contribution of interreligious dialogue to the resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So for all sorts of people, Jerusalem obviously is an international center, and especially for Jews, anyone with an active Jewish life goes to Israel frequently. So anytime you go to Israel, and it's kind of, this is your life. You meet kids you went to kindergarten with, and people you were in school with, and there's always somebody there passing through. Bump into people in the streets, and they say, "Oh, what are you doing here this time? What brings you here this particular week?" And I would say, with only just a slightly mischievous grin, I'm attending a conference on the contribution of religion to the resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I just love that. The laughter is sad, of course, but the dissonance there of the very title, which the people who named the conference intended, was to challenge the prevailing notion that religion is necessarily a problem or a source of violence in the world. And I'm certainly not here tonight to deny that there is such a phenomenon. But I do speak here tonight, and I take the turnout to suggest that I'm not alone in this. I'm a passionate believer in that much as religion obviously has often been and continues to at times be used to feed violence in the world, religion, when properly studied and understood and used as a source of inspiration and connectedness among people, can actually contribute greatly to the problem of violence in our world. So maybe just a moment's introduction. I told this story to some people at dinner. As John so kindly said, I've been a rabbi for a long time, hence the long bio. And I worked with people who were ill, and then I worked with spiritual direction. And as often happens, I was busy deciding what I thought I should be doing in my work life, and it turns out that God had other plans. And the moment when the new element of the plan showed up in my life was that my husband and I, who happened to be in Israel for one of those 2-week trips, we were visiting our son who was spending a year in Israel studying. And we took advantage of an opportunity that I had wanted to have for a number of years to visit one of the finest of many dialogue centers, Israeli-Palestinian dialogue centers in Israel. There are many such places, but I think the oldest, or one of the oldest and finest, is a place called Neve Shalom Wahat al-Salam, Oasis of Peace, which is essentially an intentional community, a town created by a Catholic priest, born a Jew, converted to Christianity, had a vision of a place in Israel, about halfway between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, where Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs or Palestinian Arabs living within Israel would live together, would create a town together, do their life together. They're not on retreat. It was not a prayer community. It was just a town where they would intentionally create a peaceful community together. And the town is home to, town was created in 1976. The town is home to a now quite renowned institution called the School for Peace, which, among all kinds of other programs for peacemaking, has a flagship program which has brought now about 50,000 high school juniors, 16-year-olds in groups of 100, each time half from Israeli Jewish schools and half from Israeli Arab schools. And anyone who knows anything about the Israeli educational system, it's almost completely divided. There's Jewish secular schools, and there are Jewish modern Orthodox schools, and there are Jewish ultra-Orthodox schools, and then there are two separate tracks of Muslim schools, and there are a handful of collaborative schools where Jewish and Palestinian Arab kids study together. So there are very few ways that Jewish Israeli kids and Palestinian Israeli kids have to naturally and peacefully come together to get to know one another. So that makes this program completely extraordinary and remarkably important. I'd been hearing about it for years, and we finally had the opportunity to go and visit. My husband and I sat behind a one-way mirror watching just the beginning of this program of the kids getting together, probably like any other teen program that you can imagine. A bunch of teenagers are coming together for a couple of days. There are icebreaker exercises. They're learning each other's names and so on. Except there was nothing remotely ordinary about this particular group of kids doing this because they don't speak the same language, literally, and they live, if not in outright war, in a conflict zone that, for the most part, defines their lives. So it was riveting just to watch the process of their learning each other's names and getting in small groups and discovering the first kind of superficial level of common ground. And we're watching, and we hadn't brought our own car, and the person who had driven us then, way before I was ready, came and said that it was time for us to leave. And my whole body resisted. I felt strongly that I was riveted to the chair and the chair to the floor. I did not want to leave that place. And then I found myself telling the story, to our son and to, the friends that I saw. I would begin to tell the story of what had happened to me at Neve Shalom, and I noticed that every time I told the story, I made this gesture. Now, I do it self-consciously, but at first it was unself-consciously. And I realized that there was some way in which I had received a message from beyond, however you understand such things, to roll up my sleeves and find some way to make myself of service toward the cause of peace. So from there, I had recently moved to Minnesota, and I had a lot of prayer and contemplation and study to do to try to figure out how on earth I was supposed to serve the cause of Israeli-Palestinian peace from my home in suburban St. Paul, Minnesota. But over a period of a number of years, I immersed myself in Israeli-Palestinian grassroots peacemaking work and got very involved in very serious conflict within the American Jewish community, believe it or not, about, maybe you would believe it, that Jews are contentious. We tend to think that people of other religious communities are less contentious than we are in our own. Well, Jewish community is a very contentious place, and most especially around issues of the Israeli-Palestinian issue. So there's peacemaking work of no end to be done within the American Jewish community about how to just talk with one another across strong differences of opinion. And suddenly, a job showed up. John Merkel's colleague and predecessor, Rabbi Barry Citrin, offered me a job doing interreligious dialogue work, and I immediately realized that although it wasn't Israel-Palestine, the work of bringing Jews and Christians and Muslims and others together to learn about one another's religions and about one another's humanity, about areas of common ground and areas of difference was surely peace work of the highest order. And all of that said, gradually I just developed an interest in all things peace and conflict. Hence the book that Pray For Me, working on. I hope the title will be From Enemy to Friend. It'll still be Amy Eilberg. That part I can say for sure. And the reason I want to call it From Enemy to Friend is because of this ancient text. It's about a 3rd century text, which begins, you see the ellipsis, the text begins with the question, who is a hero? And, you ask a group of people who is a hero and ask what springs to your mind. One might think that the first image might be an image of personal strength, of physical strength, or superficial bravery courage under fire, or that sort of thing. But the text says, answers the question, who is a hero? First with the answer, one who conquers his own evil, inner inclination to evil. And then another text, parallel text, the Avota Rabbi Natan, says, and who is the greatest of all heroes? One who turns an enemy into a friend. I've always loved that text, and it captures a lot about the work that I seek to do. And I loved it even more when I learned that there's a direct parallel in the Quran. I hope this translation does it justice. If there are Quran scholars or Muslims in the room, I have it translated: return evil with good, and your enemy will become a devoted friend. So I need to know if there's a Christian parallel as close as that. Don't answer now, but if you know of such a thing, please tell me afterwards. I don't want to discriminate against Christians. So my general goals for tonight are, as I said, to try to engage you in exploring the notion that religion can contribute to the cause of peace in the world. To engage you also in an exploration of the fact that's probably obvious to the peace and conflict folks in the room, but maybe counterintuitive to others, that all conflicts, regardless of scope, that is to say, whether it's a conflict between you and a family member or a roommate or a colleague at work on the one hand, or a colleague between, or a conflict between groups or ethnicities or even nations on the macro level, that although there are surely differences between a roommate spat or an argument with your mother on the one hand, and international conflict, all of those conflicts actually have a great deal in common. And that insight has been revelatory for me, so I'd like to explore it with you a little bit. And most importantly, if you remember one thing, here's the moment. If you remember one thing from what happened tonight, I hope you'll remember the invitation that all of us are to be peacemakers. For me, the central text about that is from the book of Psalms, Psalm 34, Bakesh Shalom V'Radfehu, seek peace and pursue it. I take that to be a central command, and I hope that you do too. And it's a life's work. Some of us get paid for it, some of us write books about it, some of us are obsessed with it, but wherever you are on that spectrum, I hope that something about the time that we spend together tonight will invite you to consider the question, not that you're going to work for the State, maybe some of you will work for the State Department or whatever it is, but in your corner of the world, in your corner of life, how can you serve as a builder of peace? So in order to talk about peacemaking, we have to talk a little bit about conflict. So if we had several hours, don't worry, we don't. I'm not going to invite you to stay till midnight, but if we had been meeting, from 8:30 to 2, which would have been really fun, because then I would have been able to get you to hear you talk and not just you hearing me talk. I would have done an exercise with you that I often do with groups, in which I give out paper and markers and crayons and stuff, and I'm of the art-phobic type, 0 gift for art. I'm acknowledging that. I ask people to draw, not with words, to draw what conflict looks like. So those of you who are doodlers, go ahead and go for it. But just imagine for a second if you had a blank piece of paper and some colored markers in front of you, what kind of image might you create? My experience of doing this exercise with many different groups is that usually the majority, sometimes the majority of the people in the room, large majority, recently had an experience where every single person in the room drew an image of pain and suffering and destruction and loss, dangerous, instruments, things grilling into one another, children crying, people turning their backs to one another, tears and loss and images of destruction of relationship. Sometimes, in my experience, I'd love to see a room full of people who had a very different image. Usually it's just a few people who draw an image something like a crack in the earth with something green growing out of it. Right? Some kind of image of destruction that creates blessing or something, some creative process in its wake. So I ask you to consider in your own life, because each of us carries around, I'm certain, an answer to that question, which has something to do with our neurology, probably, and a lot to do with the family and the community in which we are raised, and perhaps the religious tradition in which we were raised. To the extent that we assume that all conflict is pain and destruction and loss and rejection and abandonment, we're going to have trouble when we find ourselves in a room in which people are different, or in which there's strong disagreement, right? Because what we carry inside, the image we carry inside, is that disagreement means conflagration and everyone gets wounded. Some of those lucky people who have more of that kind of creative or generative notion of conflict can sometimes see other possibilities. I'm of the first group, by the way. My image always looks like sort of gears, not quite, messic, some very, metal, destructive kind of image. So the Jewish tradition has both of these images in its classical texts. The majority of the images, the Jewish tradition prefers peace over conflict any day. There isn't a big message around conflict is good in Jewish tradition. For example, again, if we had more time, I'm going to be going through Jewish texts, some of them biblical and most of them post-biblical, from 2,000 years of Jewish history. So this one, for example, is a midrash from more or less 5th or 6th century of the Common Era. Why does the Torah not say the words, "And God saw that it was good," in its account of the second day of creation? So, every day after the first day, third, fourth, fifth day of creation, it says, "And God saw that it was good." Sixth day of creation, when humanity was created, God saw that it was very good. Second day, check it out. No, and God saw that it was good. Actually, on Tuesday, it says twice. It says God saw that it was good twice. Tuesday, third day. Second day, that's a Jewish notion, is that Sunday is day one. Anyway, so why doesn't it say, "And God saw that it was good" on the second day of creation? Rabbi Hanina explained, because on the second day, separation, remember the separation of the waters above and the waters below was what God created on the second day? Separation was created on the second day. That is to say, division, estrangement, was brought into being, as indicated in "Let the firmament separate water from water." In this regard, another rabbi of Tavyomi noted, if there's no saying, fill in the ellipsis, but wait a second, the separation of the waters, the creation of the firmament to separate sky from water, was necessary to break through primordial chaos. The creation of the world depended on that act of separation. There's a creative act of separation or division, if there ever was such a thing. So Rav Taviomi says, if it doesn't say that it was good about an act of separation that was conducive or necessary to the well-being and improvement of the world, how much the more so, sorry, it's just two different translations, should these words occur? That is, conflict is usually bad. Occasionally, creation depends on it, but usually conflict is a danger. On the other hand, I'm going to skip over that one just for the sake of time. This is Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, 19th century Hasidic rabbi in Poland, or the boundaries were all shifting, but at that time, let's call it Poland. Through arguments in which people disagree with someone, they do him or her good. For through this argument, he or she can grow and flourish. When a seed is planted in the ground, if all the land were bound together, if the land is parched, and you try to put a seed into it, there's no place to fit it, right? It's like concrete. You can't get anything to embed itself there, and so nothing can grow from that place. If all the land were bound together, it would not be possible for a seed to grow and flourish and become a tree. Only when the land, there's some separations, like in the soil, only if the soil has gaps in it, can you place a seed and can growth happen. Then there'll be room for the tree to grow. That is to say, sometimes our best growth comes in arguments. Depends what kind of argument, right? Come back to that in a second. But some of the best things that many of us learn in our lives happen from those moments in our lives when someone says, you really hurt me when you said that. Or, I disagree with you so strongly and I can't even understand how you could possibly say such a thing. Can you explain to me how it is that you construct your world in that way? And then if I'm able to hear the answer, then I learn something that I might never have known. I might learn something about an aspect of God's creation that I might never have known. So sometimes, depending on a lot of things, which we'll get into in a second, separation, difference of opinion, argument conducted in the appropriate way can actually be generative, can actually be creative. Seeds can grow, things can grow in those places. Which leads me to a very well-known Jewish source. This is from a book from the Mishnah, codified in about the year 200 of the Common Era, which gives rise to a concept that's become very important in Jewish life and Jewish law, Jewish literature. A controversy for the sake of heaven. That's a really word-for-word translation of the text. A controversy for the sake of heaven will have lasting value. But a controversy that's not for the sake of heaven will not endure. What do you mean, a controversy for the sake of heaven? The debates of Hillel and Shammai. Hillel and Shammai were two great rabbis who lived just before Jesus, at the end of the last century, before the Common Era. There were two very great rabbis. The Talmud is full of their arguments and of their students' arguments with one another, but they were righteous arguments. They disagreed with one another about virtually everything. There is a Hillel Street and a Shammai Street in downtown Jerusalem, and they are parallel. They never met. The city planners joke. So the debates of Hillel and Shammai are considered, or are the definition of a controversy for the sake of heaven, because after all, why were Hillel and Shammai arguing? They weren't arguing in order to defeat or shame or delegitimize the other or steal the dignity from the other. They were arguing over matters of profound religious, spiritual, communal importance. They were arguing to try to understand God's directive about a particular area of life and about what constitutes the common good, not out of ego, not out of desire for power. That's a controversy for the sake of heaven. We might just say a righteous controversy. An example of a controversy not for the sake of heaven, remember Korach? I don't know, how do English speakers pronounce that? You know what I mean? In the book of Numbers, Hebrew speakers say Korach. Yeah, close enough. Who came one day to Moses and said, who appointed you head of the Jewish people? You know, how come the rest of us can't be leaders? And Moses says, well, you know, actually God told me that, you know, I should be in charge, and there's this whole ritual at the end of which the earth opens up and swallows 250, Korach and his whole band of rebels. The rabbis consider that an example of a controversy not for the sake of heaven, because why were they arguing? The rabbis understand that Korach were not crusaders for democracy. One could read that text that way. But the rabbis thought it wasn't, they weren't crusading for human equality. They were crusading for their own self-centered reasons. They wanted in on the power. So this gives you, I hope, a glimpse of a number of different dimensions of what can make the difference between argument or debate or controversy being destructive or being constructive. And I learned after, for years and years and years of thinking, that this idea was utterly unique in the history of the human race. The thing about interfaith dialogue is it really blows your sense of uniqueness. All these kinds of things that I thought was really just Jews were absolutely unique, except, well, there's the unique language. So it turns out that there's a concept in contemporary peace and conflict studies which talks about constructive versus destructive conflict. Is everybody thinking about what you hear on the news all the time, every day? What happens in the halls of Congress? God help us. Anyway, so what makes for the difference between a controversy, a conflict that's constructive versus destructive? That's descriptive and functional language, right? Is it helpful? Is it not helpful? This is spiritual language, right? Is it righteous, right? Is it in search of divine truth? I think there are three different layers of it. One has to do with the subject matter. A big argument about who takes out the trash, I think, can never be a controversy for the sake of heaven, because, like, why are we having this argument, right? Not to say that I have never been involved in such arguments, but so part of it is the subject matter. A lot of it is the tone and style of communication. You can argue about almost anything, well and not so well, right? With respect, with full understanding that the person on the other side is a human being just like you, or not, as we well know. And I think the difference is also about the intention. Again, why are we having this argument? I'm having this argument because I really want to destroy you, because I really want to undermine your reputation, I really want to make you feel bad. And so I trust it sounds familiar, except for the saints in the room, whoever you may be. The rest of us probably have experience with that when you know, afterwards you realize, what was it? What got me going in that way that I really used the most hurtful kind of language possible? So it's about intention, which I assume that none of us get perfectly. Just to give you another sense of that around tone of communication. So remember Hillel and Shammai, the two rabbis, always disagreed with one another, and then they had the academies that followed them in their traditions, the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel. So there are a number of stories in the Talmud about how the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel conducted their arguments with one another. Rabbi Abbas and the name of Shmuel. For 3 years, the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel disagreed about a particular point of law. I won't bore you with the specifics of it, but they were arguing for 3 years. This was probably not who's going to take out the trash in the academy. This was, something of real importance. This was worth arguing about for a long time. one said, sorry, I didn't translate this. One side said the halakha, the law, is according to us. The other side said, no, the law is according to us. A heavenly voice, bat Hebrew is bat kol, emerged, saying disembodied voice, voice out of nowhere, presumed to be divine, says, both these and these are the words of the living God. You're right, and you're also right. That's the Fiddler on the Roof. Anybody know Fiddler on the Roof? These are the words of the living God, and this side is also the words of the living God, and the law is according to the school of Hillel. Okay, but then the Talmud says, but wait a second, if these are divine words, and these are divine words, then on what basis is the law according to the school of Hillel? Because they, the school of Hillel, were humble and gentle in the way they carried themselves in conversation. They would teach both their own views and the views of the other side. Moreover, they would place the views of the other side before their own. And so picture this, not to diss the other one. You know, they think the gentlemen on the other side of the aisle think, you know, this and they're stupid. Not that, but to say, you know, an issue comes up, you know, there are those who believe, and to really kind of try to convey with empathy and respect and understanding, there are those who hold this view, and we hold this view, and this is why we consider this to be more preferable. Try it while in the midst of a political debate. I think it's not an easy thing to do, but that's the aspirational level. You know, I'm just skipping for the sense of time. Well, no, I don't need that. So, again, if we had a longer, so here's one. Remember I said that conflicts that happen in our families and in our personal relationships actually bear more resemblance than one might initially think with intergroup, intercommunal, even in some ways international conflict. So think for a second about how conflict was handled at your family dinner table growing up. I'm not gonna, no need to raise your hand, just think. What did conflict look like and sound like and feel like at your family dinner table growing up? There are cultural elements here, of course. Minnesotans often assume that I'm from New York because I'm Jewish. Of course, I'm actually from Philadelphia. A lot of Easterners, and certainly a lot of Jews from the Eastern U.S. have this very kind of culturally common, Ed Koch just died. Jewish and a New Yorker. I'm not sure that I want to hold him up as an exemplar. There are families and there are communities where there's a sense that a good political argument, for example, is enlivening. It's fun. It's connecting. You know, we love each other so much that we can really, really argue and we know we'll be okay. And really, we might learn something. It's fun to really delve into. There is a sense in some families and in some human beings that conflict is a way to learn. Maybe for more of us, I might say there's a sense that when I hear raised voices, I actually have both. It's not either or. I actually have both in my own personal background. There's kind of, before I'm even intellectually aware of it, the sound, I can be sitting at a cafe and I hear raised voices, even slightly raised voices at the next table. I'm not always immediately aware of it, but my body stiffens. There's a sense of danger. So know that in moments of very clear awareness, And at least as often in moments of not so clear awareness, or maybe I realized, afterwards, I was actually already sweating before, a word ever came out of my mouth. We take those kinds of inner assumptions or that inner landscape into our experience of conflict. So another exercise that I love, that if we had a lot more time, I would do, but just to describe it to you. Think of a time when you were in conflict, a pretty significant conflict, with someone who mattered to you, an important relationship. And then after some period of time, the conflict was resolved. Sometimes it's hard to think of one that was resolved and easier to think of one that's ongoing. But when you think of maybe a conflict in which you're engaged these weeks or this month, or something going on in your family or in your dorm, whatever, your workplace, whatever it might be, if you look inside and see kind of what's going on in me when I'm in the midst of an experience of conflict, from most people that I've heard describe this, describe a sense of tightening, of, yikes, so my whole body is, yikes. Somebody, going like this, a tightening, a nervousness, my fists clench even when I just talk about it, sometimes some sweat. There's that sense of everything narrowing. Since I started working on this book, I've read enough popular works of neuroscience to be just a little bit dangerous, not enough to really be an expert, but I know enough to know that there's a tremendous amount of research now the last 20-some years. There are MRI scans. We know exactly what the brain looks like when it's in that kind of fight or flight kind of situation, which evolutionary biologists and evolutionary psychologists will say, look, when in ancient times, when someone strange, someone unknown appeared on the horizon, or a four-legged creature appeared on the horizon, the natural response was not, oh, look, oh, how interesting, let's invite him in for tea. But the response was one of fear, and so the more ancient layers of our brain have fight or flight responses, which thank God we have, otherwise we wouldn't be sitting here. Our species wouldn't have made it through the layers of evolution. So the really interesting thing that as far as I can tell, the neuroscientists are beginning to write about with some unanimity, as far as I can tell, is that our digital age brain still responds with a kind of prehistoric brain's sense that when something scary happens, my brain at first responds as if it were a bear rushing across the field. Even if people arguing at the next table, there's that whole fight or flight instinct. Really, this feels dangerous. I kind of spring into action. I might need to pounce, and that's what all those physiological responses are. Thank God we have them so that we can jump in and respond when really there's some physical danger. But we jump into that kind of preparedness for combat, even at the sound of raised voices, to use that same example. Or some of us are more, let me get ready to pounce, and others of us have the more developed kind of flight instinct of, let me get out of here. This is scary. I really want to leave the room as soon as I can, because what's happening over there on that end of the dining room table between a number of relatives is really scary, and it's time for me to go help with the dishes, to pick a trivial example. Whereas when in those blessed times when we've had the experience of conflict then easing, then we can breathe again. My fists aren't clenched anymore. I almost feel like my innards are broader. There's space. There's a sense of freedom. There's a sense of safety. I'm not planning my next moment anymore. I can relax into the next moment. So that really the whole journey of conflict from a both neurological and I would suggest spiritual point of view, the journey of conflict resolution or conflict transformation is a journey from that kind of tightness, that place of fight or flight, to a journey of how do I reach a sense of safety or ease. And I associate that with the verse from the Psalms, out of narrow straits. I don't know how you're accustomed to translating this, but the Hebrew, this is a pretty literal translation of the Hebrew. Out of narrow straits, I've called out to you, O God. That's a really, narrowness. God answered me with broad expanse. So I think our lives are always in that dance from tension and constriction and fear and difficulty to ease and back again. So in conflict situations, my teachers at the Public Conversations Project say, conflict narrows us, inquiry expands us. When I'm really curious about, it turns out that somebody on the plane next to me has a totally different view about some issue that's really important to me, but somehow the person, something gives me the sense that it might actually be possible to have a conversation with this person and not just a screaming match. And I find arising a question of genuine curiosity. I actually want to know, tell me how you came to that point of view, and I really want to know. Then I'm expanded. Then I learned something. So humanization brings us from stricture, from constriction to expanse. The difference from seeing the other as necessarily a dangerous person or the enemy, person with whom I'm not safe. Being listened to, the experience of empathy, someone really respecting me and really wanting to know, really someone being curious about who I am and why I am who I am and why I think what I think, opens me from tension to ease, a sense of safety and connection and possibility, even when there has been offense, when there's been wounding, even very serious wounding. The journey of transformation in relationship, be it micro, me and another person, or even macro, between large groups of people in the world, moving from seeing the other as solely the source of hurt. The other side, the example that springs to mind, Israelis see Palestinians, Palestinians see Israelis, to put it in a very general term, see the other as the source of hurt. The journey of transformation is to see that the other is more than that. The other is that. And I don't mean forgive and forget in that superficial sort of way. The other may well be the source of hurt. They are probably also more than that. Surely they are human beings just like we are. A couple of beautiful texts, some from our shared biblical tradition and some uniquely from the Jewish tradition. So remember Leviticus 19, verses 17 and 18. Do not hate your kinsman in your heart. Again, I don't know what translation you're accustomed to. The text actually says your brother. Do not hate, literally, your brother in your heart. And then I've skipped a half of a verse. And then verse 18, do not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your neighbor as yourself. I am God. Sorry. All kinds of commentary. Judaism has, in generalization alert, I'm about to say something very broad to which there are exceptions, but whereas the Christian sacred literature has lots of statements of systematic theology and philosophy, in Jewish tradition, sacred wisdom unfolds at least as much through commentary on prior sacred texts as it does in a kind of systematic works. So, for example, so you won't be surprised to hear that there's a whole ton of commentary on love your neighbor as yourself. So, Abarbanel, 15th century commentator, says on that whole passage above, he sees that he's thinking, do not hate your kinsman or your heart. We're talking about the heart, that's interesting. And then vengeance, grudge-bearing, love your neighbor. How is it possible that in such a small, confined space as the heart, it's a 15th century scholar writing this, how is it possible in such a small, confined space as the heart, half full of blood and half of breath, that there could be room for both hatred and love? Such a small space, how could there possibly, don't hate your kinsman. There's not going to be enough room for both hate and love in your heart. So remove the hatred from your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. Do not say to yourself, okay, I won't bear a grudge, but I won't love him either. Sounds funny, but think about times. Okay, some of that I'll tolerate, but I'm certainly not going to extend myself in kindness or in empathy or in respect. You really can't do that because the heart's not big enough, he says. Another example. Just back a second. So remember, after love your neighbor as yourself, it says, I am God. Truth is, there are a number of places in the Torah where it says, I am God at the end of a verse. But the rabbinic commentators always assume that if it says something, it's not just for literary flourish. We're supposed to learn something from it. So why does it say, I am God, right after love your neighbor as yourself? According to a 12th century commentator, your love for me should cause you, I am God. God says, your love for me should cause you to forget your hatred of your fellow. When you find yourself in a situation of vengefulness, even in your heart, remember the I am God at the end of the passage. Think about how this situation looks to me, to God. Let your love of me, you hate this other person, but you have to remember, if you're going to read those verses, you have to attend to the I am God at the end, and let your love for me, for God, cause you to forget your hatred for the other. I'm going to skip one. But maybe I'll do this one. So again, that same passage from Leviticus. So this is now a late 19th, early 20th century scholar asking the same question. Why did it have to say, I am God at the end of love your neighbor as yourself? Love your neighbor as yourself is a complete sentence. Why I am God at the end? What's the meaning of the juxtaposition of I am God to the beginning of the verse? I have said that the intention of the verse is to explain the beginning of the verse. The part that says, don't take vengeance or bear a grudge. When you find yourself bearing a grudge against someone else, carrying an old resentment, nursing an anger over something which really, if truth be told, yes, it happened, but it really also would be possible to let it go, but you're nursing it. You're telling one more friend about it and another friend about it, and really kind of feeding the part of your brain that continues to be outraged by the person did such a thing or said such a thing. So when you find yourself in that kind of vengeful frame of mind, say to yourself in some form, how can I work on myself so that there will be no ill feeling against the other, and even love him or her? Is there some way that I can work on that hurt, angry, resentful place inside? Is there some way that I can do some work on that part of me that's spewing more hate and anger into the relationship or into the world, how do I get myself to do that, to try to cultivate a loving place rather than that vengeful place? That's why the verse says at the end, I am God who has loved that person you're so enraged at, I am God who has loved him or her. Likewise, you can love him or her. In truth, it's a simple matter. For since one can see below one's fellow only the aspect of the material in which he is clothed, we looked at another human being, we only see the superficial. The other seems as nothing in one's eyes. A jerk, right? And in particular, if in any matter the other is against you, if the person really has hurt you, you dismiss the other in your thoughts. Not the same for the Blessed Holy One, who knows the essence of the holy root of a human soul. Think about how God sees that person. That's why it says, I am God, at the end of this verse that's about vengeance and about love of the other. What does it take to challenge yourself to try to see the other as God sees him or her? And also with God's compassion, how do you imagine God's compassion for you in your pain also, and God's aspiration for you to rise from anger to love? I'm going to skip this one just because of time. So just looking at this again, I think this text is really interesting. I've been talking it through with reference to individual conflicts, interpersonal conflicts. But if you read it again on the collective level, one group of people who feels they've been harmed or actually have been harmed, some maybe grievously, by another group of people. When I look at the other, when I even read about them, maybe it's another political party, members of another political party, certainly members of a different religion, different ethnicity, nationality. When I think of the other, and seriously, the part about political party, that's no joke. I was raised, my family was as passionate in their adherence to their particular American political persuasion. I'm not going to say what it was, in case it's not obvious. As they were passionate Jews, my parents were passionate Jews, they were also passionate about their political persuasions. And although my parents were open-minded people in many ways, I really did grow up thinking that the other people were the bad guys. I really did. So who are the groups of people that we think of as the enemy? Much less reading in the newspaper about places where the enemy is the one who's killed our children, right? Stolen our land, whatever it might be. So think about this. No, sorry, I didn't talk my way through this, the one we were looking at before. Imagine what it would be to challenge ourselves every time we notice that. That infuriates me when those people talk like, how could anybody possibly say such and such about this or that? That's resentment, that's grudge, that's seeing the other as an enemy. What would it take for me to remember the end of the verse? To remember in that moment of anger or sometime after it, sometime when I'm nursing it, and I've been really giving it extra juice. What would it take for me to call to mind the I am God at the end of the verse, to remember, wait a second, how does God see those people? I know it's so aggravating to me when they say X or Y or Z, or they really have caused horrendous, unforgivable harm to my family or to my people. Even still, how do I remember the I am God, the imperative to take God's view of the other as full human being? Yeah, I can't resist doing this. Okay. Oh no, I shouldn't have done that. Hold on one sec. Yes, I did have to do that. Sorry. My technical difficulty. Yes, here we go. Please try again later. Give me a break. That's not going to work. Okay. I hate that. So my teachers at the Public Conversations Project have this little video, a minute and a half of which changed my life in the midst of a workshop. So I'm sitting in a workshop it's a multi-faith group of participants. The workshop is called Power of Dialogue. And the teachers are people who are a group of people who were originally family therapists, originally trained as family therapists in Boston. And in the 1980s, the pro-life versus pro-choice debate erupted in violence. And there were deaths erupting out of that debate in Boston in the 1980s. And a couple of these family therapists kind of called one another up and said, you know, we know something about conflict. We have conflict in our offices every day. Most of it's not physically violent. Much of it is verbally violent. We know something about what it takes to transform emotional violence into healing, at least sometimes. Let's think together about how what we know about family conflict might actually apply in some ways to the macro level of society. So the video that I wanted to play you has these little cute little animated figures, and they're different multiple colors. Their faces are different colors, and their dresses, their clothing are different colors, and so on. And then there's a huge arrow, big scary arrow, emerges on the left side of the screen, and it's labeled threat. And then a huge chasm opens up on this side of the screen. There's threat coming in. There's the earth is opening up. Shades of Korach. So now the people of the different colors and the different kind of clothing begin to orient themselves on opposite sides of the chasm. First, they're still talking to one another, and they're pretty close when they're at the narrow end of the chasm. If you can, I hope I'm being clear enough. It'd be better. The picture would have been worth many words. People are just slightly separated by a little bit of distance. They can still talk to one another. So one of them says, I think, and the other one says, I think, and there starts to be some difference between them. But as they come to be arrayed on different sides of the chasm with greater distance between them, they can't talk anymore. So each little figure has a little thought balloon with only an exclamation point. There's no more I think. There's no more communication. There's just exclamation. And then at the really broad edge of the chasm where there's no possibility of communication, there's only news media. So there's a spin, somebody shouts, yeah, you get it. Somebody shouts, and then there's a spin, and then the spin gets thrown way across the chasm, which produces more exclamations. So I'm sitting in this multi-faith group in Minneapolis, and I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking, oh my God, the presenter's not Jewish. I'm thinking, he is talking about the way Jews in the American Jewish community talk about Israel. He must have studied this. I know that's clearly what he's talking about. And a woman in the back blurted out, you're talking about the Catholic Church. And of course somebody else thought it was a Lutheran something. And the point was that that's what people do in conflict. I then wrote a little article flippantly called Your Brain on Conflict. It turns out that that's what we do. I learned in social work school that couples in conflict very often describe the other one as sick, evil, or stupid. Right? He says blue, I say green. Sick, evil, or stupid. This is, sort of a commonplace among family therapists. Think about the way Democrats and Republicans talk about one another, choose whatever issue. And the more the issue has a sense of threat attached to it, be it physical threat. I've recently been thinking a lot about gun violence. There's real physical threat involved on all sides of this debate. This isn't something that anyone can talk about calmly, right? So sometimes there's really physical threat involved, or there may be the great big arrow of danger which opens up a chasm that makes normal conversation and respectful conversation possible, is not the danger of physical threat, but of existential threat, a threat to core values or identity. Can you think of a political or religious opinion or a philosophical view that makes you nuts, that you just can't stand? Has that happened to anyone in a classroom or in a political debate or something? How could they possibly think such a thing? Even when nobody's shooting at me, there's no possible sense that there's physical danger here, but there's almost some sense of danger of how could that other view possibly exist in the world? There's almost a sense in which we are threatened by the presence of difference. And so the brain goes into its, remember, fight or flight, not our best reflective way of doing relationship. I'm going to skip that one. So, yeah, let me talk this through. So, there's a lot more that could have been said about the different ways in which religion can be used as a source of conflict or as a way to fuel conflict and hatred and division in the world. And there are actually many different ways in which the power of religion can actually be harnessed to generate love and respect and an aspiration for each of us to be our very best in our relationships, be they interpersonal or collective. And so I come back to the point that I wanted to stress most of all. What does it mean to be a peacemaker? Those of us who don't work on the diplomatic level and probably never will. What does it mean to be faithful to the command in Psalm 34, seek peace and pursue it? What does it mean to be a peacemaker? It's another 3rd century text, like the From Enemy to Friend one. You'll recognize the similar genre. The rabbi named Ben Zoma says, who is wise? Wait, stop for a second. Who is wise, right? What would you initially think? The right answer will be book learning or high IQ or something like that, right? No. Who is wise? One who learns from every person. Who is heroic? One who conquers one's own impulse to evil. Who is rich? Yes, Rita, we were talking about this, reminds me. We were talking about at dinner. Who is rich? One who is happy with what one has. Who is respected? Who is deserving of respect? One who respects all beings. There are there's a vast literature on do's and don'ts of conflict resolution and of the conduct of dialogue. I submit that this 4-line text is not a bad summary. It's also a manual for being a good human being in the world. But it has a lot to say about what it means to be a force for peace and for reconciliation in our lives and in our world. This is not for people who hold public office, not for people with advanced degrees, not for people who have the power to end wars. May they have success and may it be soon, but most of us probably will not be able to pursue peace in that way. But each one of us has multiple opportunities every day, I dare say, to either to feed energies of violence and separation in our relationships, in our small corner of the world, or to serve as ambassadors of peace. And so I close with the prayer for peace that's recited multiple times a day by traditional Jews. Virtually every one of our prayer services ends with some version of this prayer, and in some cases several different versions of this prayer. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru, amen. May the one who makes peace on high make peace for us and help us to be agents of peace in God's world for all people. Let us say, amen.
Thanks so much. Beautiful, thank you. Well, Ben Zoma in the 3rd century asked who is wise. Here in the early 21st century, we can say, Rabbi Eilberg. She's one of the great persons of wisdom that I've known, and she's confirmed it again for me tonight. Thank you. She has assured me, Rabbi Eilberg has, that any of you who would like to stay around and chat with her afterwards, she welcomes your presence. Good night.